While the coronavirus pandemic was bad news for many reasons, one positive side effect was that it exposed something about all of our jobs. Millions of people around the world were forced to continue their work from home, and as it turns out, it's perfectly fine. In this video, we cover the standoff between workers and employees on the issue of working from home, with Apple being a big figure in the battle. Apple initiated their work from home protocol in March of 2020, but they're trying to bring their employees back to the office. The fruit company is currently expecting their employees to follow a hybrid work model starting from September. That means that staff will have to come into their offices 3 days a week while having the option to work remotely on the other days. To Apple, this seems like a compromise, but their workforce isn't buying it. Tim Cook and the folks at the Cupertino UFO are banking on the fact that people will do anything to stay at Apple. For that reason alone, Apple seems bent on resisting the current trend in the American job market. Across the country and even elsewhere in the world, workers are declining jobs that require full-time or even hybrid work in the office. Now, that naturally only applies to certain fields, but Apple and the tech sector are one of them. To a certain extent, Cook might be right that people are willing to fight for their jobs at Apple. Their employees are fighting them to change their policy rather than just outright quitting. And those employees are putting up one heck of a fight across the board. Turns out being Tim Cook doesn't make everyone on your payroll Siri. There has been broad resistance against Apple's attempt to bring people back into the office. One of the groups that's taking charge against the rules is AppleTogether, a group of anonymous workers that basically functions as the union that Apple doesn't have. AppleTogether currently consists of 100,000 employees, all in the US. It's not a huge part of Apple's 2.4 million strong workforce, but it is something, and they're not the only ones. Indeed, Apple has already lost some of their employees over this issue, with the most damaging loss being Ian Goodfellow. That was a bad time for Apple to lose Goodfellow, who was their director of machine learning. While you can imagine that machine learning is a part of basically every service that Apple offers, including Siri, there's a more behind closed doors reason why Goodfellow was a big loss. He's at the forefront of his field, and he was supposedly a major player in Apple's rumored Project Titan, the self-driving car that's so good it doesn't even have manual controls. It really seemed like Ian Goodfellow's departure would shock Apple into reconsidering their plan, but they're still sticking with it. Much like their approach to product design, Apple is hoping that all this protest will eventually give way to happy compliance, but the company is playing a dangerous game. You see, Apple is a big enough company now that they've set the tone throughout Silicon Valley. If you own any tech products, and we all do, you have definitely been affected by some decision that Apple made. Just recently, Apple took chargers out of the boxes of the iPhone 12 lineup, and the entire industry quickly followed suit. It was the same story with the headphone jack, and the same story with the very first phones with notches. People watch Apple. We're seeing a similar situation here, but at the corporate level. Tech companies, Silicon Valley in particular, are looking to see if Apple folds on the issue of remote work, and whatever Apple decides to do, the rest of the industry will definitely try to make the same thing happen. So if Apple sticks to their guns at this point, things could get worse for all tech workers. Not that Apple has ever been especially sympathetic to the plight of workers. Their other workplace controversy has been standing against their retail workers' efforts to form unions. For all the liberalism that Apple shows in their consumer-facing messaging, Apple has been employing some brutal union-busting tactics. Last month, the Apple Store in Towson, Maryland, became the first Apple Store to have a union, and employees that fought for the union have called the attempts at union busting traumatic. The company was straight up threatening employees with dire consequences as they continued through the process of forming a union. They even violated their own human rights policies in the effort. Apple's support of the union could have been a positive step towards the unionization of retail employees throughout the tech industry, but it can seem like Apple doesn't really notice or care about the impact they have on the industry with their actions, and choice to try to continue exploiting their workers. Based on this story, it looks like Apple will try to double down on their hybrid work plan for as long as they can, but this story also shows that a strong enough and unified movement can absolutely take a bite out of the fruit. But why is Apple fighting so hard to get employees in the office? A lot of companies, especially smaller ones, are insisting on working in the office because of outmoded ideas of how work is supposed to be done. These are the bosses who think that an employee who isn't on company premises might be slacking off on company time, and those bosses are usually backed up by middle management who relish the control they can assert on employees who are physically physically in the same space as them. But Apple isn't really that sort of company. This policy applies to Apple's offices, and there haven't really been those sorts of horror stories about Apple's corporate culture. If this company is really insisting on working in the office, there has to be a colder and more calculated reason for why they're doing it. The kind of thing that Tim Cook, the operations wizard of Apple, would think about. Turns out there's a reason that fits the bill. And it doesn't just affect Apple either. You could say that it affects almost every business on the planet. That reason is offices. Many companies around the world have signed leases on office spaces that are going to be valid for years. But the problem is bigger for a larger company like Apple. They don't lease offices, they build them. That's an even bigger commitment since they had to buy the land, buy the materials, and pay a company to build the office there. Look at the UFO. The fruit company spent $5 billion to build Apple Park. You can imagine that it really stings them to give employees a single day in a week where they don't have to come into that thing and justify the expense. But it isn't just Apple Park. Many of their offices are in the state of California, and y'all know how expensive Californian land is right now. Now, Apple is giving up ground to their employees by offering them a hybrid plan. They must be quaking in their Gucci loafers that their workforce might take the compromise now and then push for fully remote work later down the line. Their accounting department must be figuring out a contingency plan for just that situation. But is the issue of offices a good enough reason to force people to come to work? You gotta figure that the company that spent $5 billion on their swanky futuristic HQ can more than weather the potential losses of people working from home. But the math on this must be complicated, and we're not accountants or economists. What we do know is the science is in. For jobs where fully remote work is possible, employees are more productive and have better mental health than people dealing with office drudgery. Eliminating the daily commute to work means that workers have more personal time, as well as having more freedom to spend their money any way they like. In a way, Apple's clinginess to the offices is actually still an outdated form of thinking. This is the company that revolutionized the concept of how people communicate with each other, but they don't see that the pandemic has changed the concept of work altogether. 5 years or perhaps 10 years from now, offices shouldn't even be a thing that companies invest in. The next generation of employees should be pointing at our current work culture and laughing or something. Small and medium businesses need time to update their work culture, but hasn't Apple always been the leader in reshaping culture? Again, think back to how Apple took the niche item of a smartphone and made it the very center of our lives. Or even think back to how they popularized the product category of wireless earbuds by courageously losing the headphone jack. No one thought that the AirPods or the Apple Watch were good ideas when Apple first came out with them, and now they and their competitors are everywhere. So we think that Apple needs to wake up and smell the coffee. Offices are dead, Tim. You should bury them and quietly move on. That's it for today's video. What do you think of Apple's hybrid work plan? Have we really moved past the need for offices, or do you think that there's still a place for them in the world? Let us know in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.